High Arbiter Zelos stood on the command bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, and looked at the stars with hungry eyes. His fleet stretched behind him like a river of metal and fire, 2,000 warships, each one capable of burning a world to ash. The greatest military force the Vethkai Empire had ever assembled for a single campaign. His orders were simple. Enter Sector 77 Delta. Find the species that live there. Make them kneel. The Vethkai had done this many times before. 300 star systems had fallen to their power over thousands of years. The crystalline hegemony had shattered like glass before their weapons. The Morketh hives had been burned from their tunnels and forced into slavery. The proud Silurian Republic had become nothing but dust and memory. Zelos had led many of these conquests himself. He knew war the way other beings knew breathing. It was natural. It was right. The strong ruled, and the weak served. This was the order of the universe. But something strange had happened when he received his orders. The Galactic Council had sent a message. Not a threat, not a demand, but a warning. The message was short and clear. Terran space is forbidden. Do not enter. Do not engage. Do not provoke. Zelos had laughed when he read it. The Galactic Council was a group of old and tired species who had grown soft in their comfort. They feared everything. They warned against everything. Their words meant nothing to the Vethkai. But then other messages came. Ancient species from the far corners of the galaxy sent warnings of their own. They spoke of a race called humans, or Terrans, who had crawled up from a death world and somehow reached the stars. They spoke in whispers and shadows, as if they were afraid that speaking too loudly might draw attention. One message came from the Kethvori, a species so old that they had watched stars be born and die. Their words were simple. We have seen empires rise and fall for 10 million years. We fear nothing in this galaxy, but we do not enter Terran space. Neither should you. Zelos deleted the message without a second thought. His second-in-command, Fleet Commander Voreth, was not so certain. Voreth was younger than Zelos, but he was smart and careful. He had studied the quarantine zone that surrounded Terran space. It had been established 500 years ago, and in all that time, no species had crossed it. High Arbiter, Voreth said, his voice low so that the bridge crew would not hear. Perhaps we should gather more information before we proceed. We know nothing about these Terrans. Zelos turned to look at his subordinate. His eyes were cold. We know everything we need to know. They are one species, on a handful of worlds, with technology that our scans show is no better than mid-tier galactic standard. We have 2,000 ships. What could they possibly do to stop us? Voreth wanted to argue, but he saw the look in his commander's eyes and stayed silent. Zelos had won 100 battles. He had never known defeat. Perhaps he was right. The fleet crossed the quarantine boundary at the start of the next cycle. Sensors swept the space ahead, looking for threats, looking for targets. For the first few hours, they found nothing, just empty space and distant stars. Then a transmission came through on all frequencies. Every ship in the fleet received it at the same time. Every screen, every speaker, every communication device carried the same message. A human face appeared. It was strange to Vethkai eyes. Soft skin, small eyes, flat features. The human was female, with dark hair pulled back from her face. She wore a simple gray uniform with no decorations. You have entered restricted space, she said. Her voice was calm and clear. There was no fear in it, no anger, just a statement of fact. You have one standard cycle to withdraw. There will be no second warning. The transmission ended. Silence fell across the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. Officers looked at each other, uncertain. They had expected threats, boasts, demands for negotiation. They had not expected this quiet statement, delivered with such complete confidence. Zelos laughed. The sound broke the tension, and soon other officers were laughing too. One species, threatening a fleet of 2,000 warships? It was absurd. It was insulting. Continue forward, Zelos ordered. Find their worlds. We will teach them what happens to those who threaten the Vethkai Empire. The fleet moved deeper into Terran space. Their target was a world called New Helsinki. Scans showed it was a modest colony, home to only 8 million humans. The planet had minimal orbital defenses. A small station hung in orbit, along with a handful of ships that were clearly civilian vessels. It looked like an easy conquest. Zelos opened a channel to the planet. This is High Arbiter Zelos of the Vethkai Empire. You are now subjects of the Empire. Surrender your world, your resources, and your people. Resistance will result in the destruction of your cities and the enslavement of your population. For a long moment, there was no response. Then a human male appeared on the screen. He was older, with gray hair and lines on his face. His title appeared at the bottom of the screen. Governor Marcus Chen. The governor looked at Zelos with an expression that the High Arbiter could not read. It was not fear. It was not anger. If Zelos had been forced to name it, he might have called it pity. We gave you a chance, the governor said. His voice was soft, almost sad. May whatever gods you worship have mercy on your souls. The transmission ended, and then everything went silent. The human station went dark. The civilian ships vanished from sensors. The planet below stopped all transmissions. Every signal, every electronic signature, every sign of life simply disappeared. Zelos felt something cold touch his spine. It was a feeling he had not experienced in many years. It took him a moment to recognize it. It was the first stirring of fear. Scan the planet, he ordered. Find them. His officers worked their controls. Their faces grew pale. High Arbiter, Vorath said, his voice barely above a whisper. We cannot find them. They are simply gone. Zelos stared at the dark planet below. 8 million humans had just vanished from his sensors. His fleet of 2,000 warships hung in the void, watching, waiting. For 6 long hours, nothing happened, and then the dying began. The first ship to die was the Crimson Blade, a destroyer on the outer edge of the formation. One moment it was there, its engines glowing bright, its crew going about their duties. The next moment it was gone. No explosion, no distress call, just empty space where a warship had been. Zelos stared at his tactical display, waiting for an explanation. His officers scrambled at their stations, running scans, checking sensors, trying to understand what had happened. Report, he demanded. We do not know, High Arbiter, Vorath said. His voice shook slightly. There was no weapon signature, no incoming fire. The ship simply ceased to exist. Before Zelos could respond, 2 more ships vanished, then 3 more, then 5. They disappeared from different parts of the formation, with no pattern that the Vethkai officers could detect. One moment a ship was there. The next moment it was not. Panic began to spread through the fleet. Captains screamed for orders. Crews abandoned their posts. Some ships began to break formation, trying to flee, but they did not know which direction was safe. Then the whispers started. On every ship, on every frequency, voices began to speak. They spoke in perfect Vethkai language, which should have been impossible. They spoke the names of crew members. They spoke the names of their families back home. They described their homes, their children, their secret fears. We know where your daughter goes to school, Captain Vorath, a voice said on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion. Such a pretty child. She looks just like her mother. Vorath went white. He had never told anyone about his family. The information was sealed in classified files that no enemy should have been able to access. Zelos tried to block the transmissions, but nothing worked. The voices continued, calm and quiet, speaking things that should have been private, speaking things that should have been safe, and still the ships kept disappearing. After 4 hours, a crew member on the battleship Wrath of Empire finally saw something. He was watching the space near a small asteroid, and he noticed a shadow that did not belong there. He increased magnification on his screen, trying to see what it was. A shape emerged from the darkness. It was small, perhaps 1/10 the size of a Vethkai destroyer. Its hull was matte black, designed to absorb light and sensor waves. It had no visible weapons, no obvious engines, nothing that marked it as a warship. Then the crew member realized that the ship had been there all along. It had been hiding in the shadow of the asteroid, invisible to sensors, waiting. Contact, he screamed into his communicator. I have visual contact with enemy vessel. The shadow ship moved. It did not move like any vessel the Vethkai had ever seen. It did not accelerate slowly or turn in wide arcs. It simply went from still to impossibly fast in the space of a heartbeat. Before the battleship could bring its weapons to bear, the shadow ship was gone. The Wrath of Empire exploded 3 seconds later. Now that they knew what to look for, the Vethkai began to see the humans everywhere. They emerged from asteroid shadows, from the dark spaces between stars, from places so close to Vethkai ships that they should have been detected hours ago. There were hundreds of them, small and fast and deadly. Zelos finally understood what he was facing. The humans had not been caught off guard by his arrival. They had been waiting for him. They had hidden their ships in places his sensors could not see, and they had watched his fleet with cold patience, studying their movements, learning their patterns. Now they were hunting. The battle, if it could be called a battle, lasted 11 minutes. The Vethkai ships were designed to fight in formations, to crush enemies with overwhelming firepower. But there was no enemy formation to crush. The human ships struck from shadows and vanished before return fire could find them. They did not fight like soldiers. They fought like predators. 400 Vethkai ships died in those 11 minutes. Zelos watched his tactical display turn red with loss after loss. His hands gripped the arms of his command chair so hard that his claws drew blood. He had never seen anything like this. He had never imagined anything like this. "High Arbiter," Vorath said. His voice was hollow, empty of hope. "What are your orders?" Zelos looked at the display. His fleet was in chaos. Ships were firing wildly at shadows. Some had collided with each other in their panic. The humans were everywhere and nowhere, striking and vanishing. Impossible to catch, impossible to stop. He had no choice. "All ships, retreat," he ordered. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "Full speed to the quarantine boundary. All ships, retreat." The fleet turned and ran, but the humans were not finished with them. As the surviving 1,600 ships fled toward the boundary, the whispers continued. The voices spoke of shame and cowardice. They spoke of the families who would learn of this defeat. They spoke of the futures that the dead would never have. And in the darkness behind them, the shadow ships followed. Zelos had thought that reaching the quarantine boundary would mean safety. He had thought that the humans would stop at their own border, satisfied with their victory. He had thought wrong. The human ships followed them into open space. They did not attack immediately. They simply followed, always there, always watching, always just beyond weapons range. "Why do they not attack?" Vorath asked. "Why do they follow?" Zelos did not answer. He was remembering something he had read long ago. In an old report about the species that lived on death worlds, their planets were harsh and dangerous, filled with creatures that wanted to kill them. To survive, these species had developed many strategies. The humans, the report had said, were persistence predators. Their ancestors had not been fast enough to catch their prey in a short chase, so they had learned to follow their prey for hours, even days, never stopping, never resting, until their target collapsed from exhaustion. The hunt, for the humans, was never about the first strike. It was about the long chase. It was about wearing down the enemy until they had nothing left. Zelos looked at the shadow ships that followed his fleet, and he understood. The battle at New Helsinki had not been the war. It had only been the beginning. The humans were going to chase them all the way home, and they were never going to stop. He turned to Vorath, and for the first time in his long life, High Arbiter Zelos did not know what to do. "Send a message to the homeworld," he said quietly. "Tell them what has happened. Tell them the humans are coming." He paused, looking at the darkness behind them. "Tell them we have made a terrible mistake." The retreat became a nightmare that would not end. Zelos had hoped that once they left human space, the shadow ships would turn back. They did not. He had hoped that the humans would grow tired, grow bored, find something else to hunt. They did not. Day after day, the dark shapes followed his fleet, never attacking in force, never giving him a moment of peace. They struck at night, when crews were tired and defenses were slow. They appeared from the darkness, killed a ship or two, and vanished before anyone could respond. By the time weapons were ready to fire, there was nothing to fire at. Sleep became impossible for the Vethkai. Every shadow might hide an enemy. Every flicker on a sensor screen might be death coming. Crew members began to break under the pressure. Some stopped eating, some stopped speaking, some simply walked to airlocks and opened them, choosing a quick death over the slow terror of waiting. Zelos tried everything he knew. He changed formation every few hours, hoping to confuse the hunters. They adapted within minutes. He sent fast ships to scout ahead, hoping to find ambushes before they were sprung. The scouts never returned. He tried to set traps, leaving damaged ships as bait. The humans never took the bait. On the 10th day of the retreat, Vorath came to him with a report that made his blood run cold. "High Arbiter," Vorath said, "we have lost communication with the homeworld." Zelos looked up from his tactical display. "What do you mean? Lost communication? All faster-than-light communication channels have gone silent. We cannot reach anyone outside this fleet. We are alone." Zelos felt the cold touch of fear again. Faster-than-light communication required relay stations scattered across space. Those stations were heavily defended. For them to go silent meant that someone had destroyed them. The humans had not just followed his fleet. They had moved ahead of it. They had cut off every path home, every call for help, every hope of rescue. He was trapped. The days continued to pass. 1,800 ships became 1,500 as the humans picked off stragglers. 1,500 became 1,200. 1,200 became 1,000. The crew of the Eternal Dominion began to whisper among themselves. They said that the High Arbiter had led them into a trap. They said that he should have listened to the warnings. They said that he had doomed them all. Zelos heard the whispers but did nothing. What could he do? They were right. On the 20th day, the first mutiny happened. The captain of the cruiser, Endless Glory, announced that he was surrendering to the humans. He ordered his weapons powered down and sent a message offering his ship and crew to the enemy. No one answered him. No human ship appeared to accept his surrender. 1 hour later, the Endless Glory exploded from the inside. Investigators found signs of breaching pods attached to the hull. The humans had boarded the ship in secret, killed everyone on board, and destroyed it from within. There would be no surrender. The humans were not interested in prisoners. The mutinies stopped after that. The crews now understood that there was no escape in surrender. There was only running, and hoping, and dying. On the 30th day, they finally reached Veth Kai space. Zelos stood on the bridge and watched familiar stars appear on his screen. Home, safety, the border where the humans would surely stop. 300 ships remained from his original fleet of 2,000. 300 ships crewed by broken, terrified survivors who flinched at shadows and cried in their sleep. "We have crossed the border," Vorath reported. His voice was hollow. "We are in Veth Kai space." Zelos waited for the shadow ships to turn back. He waited for the chase to end. The shadow ships did not turn back. They followed the fleet across the border and kept coming. They did not care about lines on a map. They did not care about treaties or territories. The hunt was not over because the humans said it was not over. Zelos sent a desperate message to the nearest military station. "This is High Arbiter Zelos. I need immediate reinforcements. The humans have followed us into our space. Repeat. The humans are in Veth Kai space." The reply came quickly. "High Arbiter, we are aware of the situation. The High Council has been informed. They are discussing the matter. Discussing." While his crews died one by one, the Council was discussing. "Tell them to stop discussing and start fighting," Zelos roared. "The enemy is here. They are in our home." There was a long pause. Then the voice came back, quieter now. "High Arbiter, there are reports of human activity across the Empire. Communication disruptions, explosions at military bases, ships vanishing without explanation. The Council believes the humans were already here. They were waiting for this." Zelos felt the world tilt beneath him. The humans had not just followed his fleet. They had been inside the Empire all along, sleeping agents and hidden ships, waiting for the right moment to wake up. He had not started a war. He had triggered one. On the main screen, the familiar lights of a Veth Kai defense station appeared ahead. It was a massive structure, home to 50 warships and thousands of soldiers. It was supposed to be the first line of defense against any enemy. As Zelos watched, the station went dark. Lights flickered and died. Ships docked at its ports, went silent. Then the station began to break apart, piece by piece, as if something was taking it apart from the inside. The humans had arrived before him. They were already destroying everything. Vorath looked at the destruction with empty eyes. "What do we do, High Arbiter?" Zelos had no answer. He had led the greatest fleet in the Empire to destruction. He had ignored every warning. He had believed that strength was enough. He had been wrong about everything. "We fight," he said finally, because there was nothing else to say. "We fight until we cannot fight anymore." But even as he spoke, he knew it would not be enough. Nothing would be enough. The humans had come home with them. And they were just getting started. The Vethkai Empire learned the true meaning of fear. In the 3 months that followed the return of High Arbiter Zelos, everything the Empire had built began to crumble. It did not happen all at once. It happened slowly, painfully, like a great beast bleeding from 1,000 small wounds. The humans never invaded. They never landed armies on Vethkai worlds. They never tried to occupy territory or capture cities. What they did was far worse. They took away everything that made the Empire work. Shipyards that had built warships for 1,000 years exploded in the night. No one saw the attackers. No one heard warnings. Workers arrived in the morning to find nothing but floating debris where their factories had been. Military bases lost power without explanation. Weapons systems failed at critical moments. Computers displayed messages in human language, counting down to destruction that came exactly on time. Communication networks became unreliable. Messages sent to one place arrived somewhere else, or nowhere at all. Orders from the High Council reached fleet commanders days late, or changed into different orders entirely. No one knew what was real anymore. The economy collapsed. Trade ships disappeared. Resource convoys were destroyed. Factories that made weapons could not get materials. Factories that made food could not send their products to the hungry. Worlds that had known plenty for generations began to starve. And through it all, the propaganda came. Human voices spoke on every channel, in perfect Vethkai language, telling the people what their leaders had done. They described the attack on human space in detail. They named the ships that had died, the innocents who had been threatened. They asked simple questions that had no good answers. Why did your leaders attack a species that had never harmed you? Why did they ignore the warnings of every other species in the galaxy? Why should you die for their mistake? The questions spread like disease. Citizens who had trusted their government began to doubt. Soldiers who had believed in their mission began to wonder. The empire that had seemed unbreakable began to crack. The High Council summoned Zelos to explain himself. He stood before the 12 most powerful Vethkai in the galaxy and told them what he had seen. He told them about the shadow ships and the whispers. He told them about the hunt that never ended. He told them about enemies who appeared from nowhere and vanished before they could be fought. The council did not want to hear it. You had 2,000 ships, the first arbiter said, his voice cold with anger. The greatest fleet ever assembled. And you ran from an enemy you could not even see? I ran because there was no other choice. Zelos replied. His voice was tired. He had not slept in weeks. They are not like any enemy we have faced before. They do not fight for territory or glory. They fight to destroy. They fight to teach lessons that will never be forgotten. Then we will teach them a lesson of our own, the first arbiter declared. We will mobilize the full might of the Empire, every ship, every soldier, every weapon we possess. We will crush these humans and burn their worlds to ash. Zelos shook his head slowly. You do not understand. They want us to do exactly that. They want us to gather our forces in one place. They want us to give them a target. The council did not listen. They never listened. The order went out. Every ship in the Empire was called to the homeworld. Every soldier was mobilized. Every weapon was prepared. The Vethkai would meet the human threat with overwhelming force. The humans responded by doing nothing. For 2 weeks, the shadow ships stopped attacking. The propaganda went silent. The sabotage ceased. The Empire began to think that it had won, that the humans had seen the gathering army and fled in fear. They were wrong. On the 15th day, the human fleet arrived. It was not a massive armada like the Vethkai had expected. It was a small force, perhaps 200 ships, appearing at the edge of the system. The Vethkai commanders laughed when they saw it. They had gathered over 5,000 warships. What could 200 enemies do against such power? The human ships did not attack the fleet. They attacked the infrastructure behind it. Supply lines were cut in a single strike. Fuel depots exploded. Ammunition reserves were destroyed. The great fleet of the Vethkai found itself stranded, unable to move, unable to fight, trapped by its own size. The humans picked them apart over the following week. They did not engage in open battle. They struck at weak points, destroyed support ships, killed commanders in their quarters. The massive Vethkai fleet became a massive Vethkai graveyard. The first arbiter ordered a retreat, but there was nowhere to retreat to. The infrastructure that would have supported a withdrawal no longer existed. Ships ran out of fuel and drifted. Crews starved. The greatest military force in Vethkai history died not in battle, but in the cold emptiness of space. The council captured a human officer during one of the final engagements. They brought her before them, hoping to learn something, anything, that would help them survive. She was a small human female with gray streaks in her brown hair. She wore a simple uniform and looked at the council with calm, steady eyes. "Why?" the first arbiter demanded. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from us?" The human smiled. It was not a happy smile. "You came to our space with weapons ready and demanded our surrender," she said. "You threatened to enslave our people and destroy our cities. You did this not because we harmed you, but because you believed you could, because you believed that strength gave you the right." She leaned forward, and her voice became cold. "We are teaching you that strength alone is not enough. We are teaching you that actions have consequences. We are teaching you that some species are not to be touched." The first arbiter stared at her. "You have not invaded us. You have not occupied our worlds. Why?" "Invasion requires occupation," the human replied. "Occupation requires resources. We do not want your space. We do not want your people. We want you to remember. We want every species in this galaxy to look at what happened to the Vethkai Empire and understand what it means to threaten humanity." She looked around at the council, at their pale faces and trembling hands. "You asked for this war. We are simply finishing it." The first arbiter had no response. The next morning, the human was gone from her cell. No one saw her leave. No one knew how she escaped, but her words remained, echoing in the minds of every Vethkai who had heard them. They had started a war they could not win, and now they had to live with the consequences. 1 year after High Arbiter Zelos crossed the quarantine boundary, the Vethkai Empire ceased to exist. It did not fall in a single battle or surrender in a single moment. It simply stopped being what it had been. The military that had conquered 300 star systems was gone, broken into pieces too small to matter. The economy that had fed billions was shattered, leaving worlds to fend for themselves. The government that had ruled with iron authority had lost all respect, all trust, all power. The species that the Vethkai had conquered saw their chance. The Morketh hives rose up against their masters. The survivors of the Silurian Republic declared independence. A dozen other species threw off their chains and fought for freedom. The humans did not help these rebellions. They did not need to. They had done enough damage that the Empire could not fight on multiple fronts. All they had to do was wait and watch as everything fell apart. Zelos survived the collapse. He had been stripped of his rank and title, blamed for everything that had happened. He spent his days in a small room in the capital city, watching the news, seeing the destruction he had caused. He had become the most hated Vethkai in history. Children learned his name as a warning. Parents told stories of his arrogance and stupidity. He was the fool who had poked a sleeping predator and brought ruin upon his people. He accepted the hate. He deserved it. On the anniversary of his crossing into human space, a message arrived at his door. It was an invitation, sealed with the mark of the new provisional government that had formed from the ashes of the Empire. He was summoned to the Great Hall to witness something historic. He went, not because he wanted to, but because he had nothing else to do. The Great Hall was filled with Vethkai officials. All of them new, all of them terrified. The old leaders were gone, dead or fled or hiding. These new leaders were trying to build something from the ruins, but they did not know how. At the center of the hall stood a single figure that was not Vethkai. She was human, small and slim, with dark skin and white hair cut short against her skull. She wore a simple gray uniform with no decorations, no medals, no signs of rank. She stood with her hands clasped behind her back, waiting with perfect patience. Zelos recognized her posture, her calm. She looked like the human officer the council had captured. She looked like every human he had ever seen. She looked dangerous. The head of the provisional government, a nervous official named Tethros, stepped forward to address the gathered crowd. "We are here to mark the end of hostilities between the Vethkai people and the Terran Federation," he announced. His voice shook slightly. "The humans have agreed to cease military operations in our space. In return, we have agreed to respect the boundaries established by the Galactic Council." He turned to the human ambassador. "Do you have words for us?" The human stepped forward. Her eyes moved across the crowd, calm and measuring. When she spoke, her voice carried to every corner of the hall without effort. The Galactic Council established the quarantine around Terran space 500 years ago, she said. They did this not to protect us from the galaxy, but to protect the galaxy from us. Murmurs ran through the crowd. Zelos leaned forward, listening. Humanity has spent its entire existence fighting, the ambassador continued. We fought our world, which tried to kill us with predators and diseases and disasters. We fought each other, in wars that burned across our planet for thousands of years. We fought the universe itself, clawing our way to the stars against odds that should have destroyed us. She paused, letting her words sink in. We have refined war into a science and an art form. We have learned every way that one thinking being can destroy another. We do not seek conflict, but we do not flee from it. We do not start wars, but we end them. She looked directly at Tethros. The Galactic Council asked us to stay within our borders. We agreed, not because we feared other species, but because we recognized what we are capable of. We knew that if we spread across the galaxy with our ships and our soldiers and our endless hunger for conflict, we would leave nothing but ash behind us. Your empire forced us to demonstrate that capability. Tethros swallowed hard. What do you want from us? Nothing, the ambassador said simply. We do not want your space. We do not want your resources. We do not want your service or your worship or your fear. She reached into her uniform and pulled out a small device. It was a beacon, no larger than her hand, pulsing with a soft blue light. This beacon marks Vethkai space as forbidden to human military operations. As long as it transmits, no human warship will cross your borders. As long as it transmits, you will be safe from us. She placed the beacon on the table before her. Rebuild your civilization. Learn from what has happened. Grow stronger and wiser. But understand this. The quarantine exists for your protection, not ours. If any species crosses into our space with hostile intent again, we will respond as we responded to you. She turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. Her eyes found Zelos in the crowd, and she looked at him for a long moment. The next species that forgets this lesson will not receive the mercy we showed you. Tethros stared at her. Mercy? You destroyed everything we built. You killed millions of our people. You reduced our empire to ruins. The ambassador's expression did not change. Yes, she said. And we let you live. That is human mercy. She walked out of the hall without looking back. Silence filled the great hall. No one moved. No one spoke. Zelos looked at the small beacon on the table, pulsing its quiet warning. He thought about all the warnings he had ignored, all the voices that had told him to turn back. He thought about the quarantine that had stood for 500 years, protecting species like his from a predator they could not understand. Terran space is forbidden. He finally understood what those words meant. They were not a challenge. They were not a claim of territory. They were a warning, written in the language of blood and fire, telling the galaxy what would happen to those who forgot. The humans had not conquered the Vethkai. They had broken them, taught them a lesson they would never forget, and walked away. They had shown the galaxy exactly what they were capable of, and then returned to their quiet corner of space. They were not rulers. They were not conquerors. They were the reason the lights stayed on and the children slept safe at night across 1,000 worlds. Because everyone knew what would happen if they were disturbed. Zelos stood in the great hall, surrounded by the ruins of everything he had known, and he understood at last. The quarantine was not a cage for humans. It was a cage for everything else, and the humans held the only key. He walked out of the hall and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, beyond the boundary, the Terrans were waiting. Patient, watchful, ready. They would always be waiting, and the galaxy would never forget.